Why would I sell the car of my dreams for a food truck that wasn't?
Or rattle off condiment combinations in my sleep.
Extra mayo, all the mustard, ketchup on the side.
I mean, when did an app become my favorite tool? Nothing personal, Spatula. It's because I wanted to make the best burger ever. And QuickBooks suite of tools helped me get there.
Intuit QuickBooks helps small businesses be more successful. Learn more at QuickBooks.ca.
You know what I want? I want to talk
Hello and welcome to the Raptors Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Samson Folk, and today a draft-oriented podcast because it is about that time of the year. And for the first time in 7-8 seasons, the Raptors have their eye towards a high lottery pick that is actually theirs. This isn't a Jakob Poeltl situation. This is a Raptors are missing the playoffs. They're firmly in the lottery. By the looks of it, the 7th best odds. And so I'm here with the draft expert, PD Webb, who's been on before, who I hope you appreciated because I appreciate immensely. PD, how you doing, man?
I'm doing wonderful. It's a nice sunny day outside. I get to talk about my favorite subject in the world with a team I've, seemed to have adopted. I'm very excited.
What makes these Raptors somewhat of an adopted team for you?
I just weirdly found myself following like 10% of all of the Raptors fan base, and they come up a lot in talking about the draft because of their development staff and the really modern way that they've built their team. So I guess there's just been a mutual affinity between my appreciation for the Raptors and feeling embraced by the Raptors community. So yeah, very excited.
Perfect. I suppose that does make sense. Just because I'm a part of the Raptors community, it does loom large in a lot of the conversations and community that I see, but who's to say if that's the case for a lot of people? And it's cool to see that people that I respect their work, like yourself, revere even to some degree, that Toronto looms large for you as well. But first thing we'll talk about, I think, because there's always a chance that the Raptors get really high in the lottery, that they have a very good turn of luck, let's say. So is it a top 2 and then a secondary 2? How does the top 4, the top 3 break out? How are you kind of ranking that? Well, let's not say ranking, tiering.
I think for the Raptors specifically, it's a top 1, with Cade being the 1. Not that, like, there are circumstances and there are teams that would see Evan Mobley as the better solution. But I think that the way that Cade plays and the way that the Toronto Raptors are built currently, Cade makes the most sense and would be a natural fit to continue this evolution.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then Evan Mobley, let's say the Raptors get between 2 and 5. So that's Mobley, Suggs, Green, and insert one of, Kuminga, Scotty Barnes, whoever, right?
That becomes a much larger team building question. That leads into more of like who will be on this team next year, and is there further tinkerings to be made? So I would say that's more of a TBD. I mean, I think that Mobley makes sense. Green makes sense. Jaden Springer makes sense. There's a lot of different, like, because of the Raptors' extreme flexibility positionally, there are a lot of ways that you could lean that out because they have a roster that has a lot of disparate parts that could be rejiggered depending on the main organizing talent.
Okay, well, we'll get into the team building stuff later and what they've kind of had a proclivity towards choosing in a bit. But let's do the top one then. Just the cliff notes of Cade Cunningham, why Raptors fans might be excited. I know lots of them know, but for those who aren't and haven't paid much attention to the draft and are hearing this stuff for the first time, what is the pitch for Cade?
Cade Cunningham is a 6'7", 6'8" point guard with an over 7-foot wingspan. He is sort of the prototypical winner. He makes good decisions at every single turn, to the point that draft analysts were worried that he might try to make the right play too much in college, where he was on a team where he was expected to score the majority of the team's points. He molded his game to be more of a scorer and more of, I would say, like a shoot first primary, which isn't his best skill. We came into the season with his shooting being questioned, and he shot 5.8 threes per 36 and shot 40% on them, with a shot that looks very fluid, shot off the dribble, shot from deep, shot off a little bit of movement. He's a strong point of attack player, solid but not excellent handle, capable of making the right decision at seemingly every possible decision point. Defensively, you can slide him around all over. It seems that the thing he enjoys most on a basketball court is making good defensive rotations, something that I think Nick Nurse would enjoy very much. Seemingly, he's a guy who's hyper competitive and driven by playing the right style of basketball, in terms of understanding coverages, in terms of executing them perfectly, rotations, closeouts. Like, this is a detail driven guy in a way that's pretty unusual for a big point guard, which is usually guys who play on a lot of instinct and maybe are a little more like fun, where Cade Cunningham seems to be like just straightforward, like, let's win this game by any means necessary.
Mm-hmm. It's the shooting is definitely a really interesting wrinkle, is that how he was able to develop into one of the best, by the numbers, one of the better shooters in college basketball, especially on the pull up. I think is very interesting, especially just to do it at that level, at that speed, to go from a guy, as you say, who was maybe not noticed as a shooter and that wasn't something he was projected as to do at the college level, something he'd be building on for a while. And then all of a sudden it's there, and mixed in with, the defensive awareness or defensive feel, to use a better term. But okay, so Cade, obviously very, very good and incredibly valuable player. He looks to be one of the most affecting players over the next however many years. If he can translate it, fantastic. The Raptors get top one, pick Cade. Now, when it comes to like scoring guards, and the Raptors in recent years just picking at kind of the back end of the draft, I think they were trying to hit on market inefficiencies, whereas they're trying to pick guys who had easily translatable skills, guys who had already shown a modicum of success in college, and they didn't care that they were 21, 22 coming out of the draft. And then OG Anunoby, obviously, with the torn ACL as well. So that's a really interesting wrinkle of the Raptors, is that they've clearly had an idea that they can take guys who don't have great jump shots, that they can develop that in-house, that they're okay with taking older players. And now they're at a point where they are lacking a little bit of shot-making pop or event creation and rim pressure. Are there any players in the middle back end of the lottery who intrigue you? I know Jaden Springer, and then at the very top end, guys like Jalen Green, they alleviate some of those woes.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on two major ones. I mean, if you're thinking of off-ball players, James Bouknight from USC is probably going to be available in that like 8 to 14 range, depending on how the draft lottery plays out. And he's, has a Zach LaVine-esque athleticism, with his ability to get downhill and then make something special happen at the rim when he does get downhill. A lithe two guard who's capable of contorting himself into small spaces, and rising over the top if the defense sells out on the ability to put pressure on the rim. Boatnight's shooting percentage wasn't fantastic this year, shooting around 30%, but it's a projectable jumper, and I do believe in it long term to get above league average. But rim pressure and transition rim pressure are going to be the calling cards for him, along with just shot making in general.
Okay, and a guy like Jaden Springer, what are your thoughts on him coming out of Tennessee?
Yeah, Jaden Springer is I would say my guy in this draft. The player that I have the largest disagreement, both from like broad consensus and also like draft coverage consensus. You'll see him mocked anywhere from like, I would say 7 to 25, and I would be very comfortable taking him in the top 5. He's one of the youngest players in this draft, and I believe he's the youngest American player who will be end up being selected. He doesn't shoot a lot of threes, only like 2.5 per 36, but he shot 44% on them. And he is a defensive bulldog who like just strongs his way to the rim, despite being only about like 6'4". I would view him as more of like a small wing than a out and out guard, because he can defend multiple positions using the strength and center of gravity to dislodge bigger ball handlers. Gets to the rim, gets fouled, 44% free throw attempt rate, which is pretty good for the system that he played in. He's a 2-foot finisher, which makes it a little more difficult to be a primary. But on a team where you have Pascal, OG, Fred, there's always going to be a team, a defense in rotation responding to an attempt to drive. So I think that this would be if they do fall, this would be like the person I would be most excited about them picking. Not just because of their famed development program, but also like it makes a lot of sense to their roster and the things they've historically shown to be good at. I was talking to a person and described him as guard-sized OG Anunoby in terms of how he plays basketball. And to have guard-sized OG Anunoby and regular-sized OG Anunoby. Not the same level of scarves I've seen, but that, all rookies can develop. Maybe he adds to the scarf game as he gets older. But I think that would be a really, really good fit.
DeLon Wright, he told a story about how DeMar and Kyle took him shopping. Well, DeLon Wright and Norm Powell. This is Norm Powell's story. He went with DeLon. But about how they took them shopping and said, get whatever you want. And that was completely alien to Norm. So maybe Jaden Springer, somebody on the team will take him, maybe even OG for scarf shopping, something to look forward to. But I think it was Mike Prada in his newsletter talked about how Jimmy Butler gets himself into positions to utilize his lower body strength, and how that's one of the major discrete skills. I know that's kind of an oxymoron, the major discrete skill that drives a lot of what he does in the middle of the floor. Does Jaden Springer have anything going on, maybe not akin to Jimmy Butler, but what are the discrete skills that kind of drive his game?
Yeah, I mean, he has a similar low center of gravity, and they're both like built like NFL running backs, where just like it's all thighs and calves, and so he's really capable of getting under ball handlers defensively. Famously, he played Jalen Suggs extremely well in a youth game, and he's the only person that I saw that really, really gave Cade trouble, despite being almost a year younger than both of them in terms of age. So like he's always been able to dislodge ball handlers defensively, and on offense, while his handle is a bit funky, he does sort of have that same like 2-footed stiltedness, that like the timing that Jimmy Butler has developed. And I think that as he gets more flexible and as teams respond to the shooting, there's going to be the same sort of like pro hops and like weird floaters that, Eastern Conference fans have grown to hate so much. Jimmy Butler throwing up this like weird looking crap, and then it just goes in time and time again.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. I think Robel brought this up, a mutual friend. Robel talked about how Jaden Springer categorically funky finishes, as you talked about, but kind of similar to Kyle Lowry and Jimmy Butler, is that you're those, as you say, pro hop, but you're kind of bursting through the seam, the second level of defense to get to the rim, and that kind of like gather, busting through the line like a running back, hop step, getting to spaces on the floor that you kind of have no business being in, and maintaining the balance all the same. And just the ability to finish strong in there is one of the Raptors don't really have that in a guard outside of Kyle Lowry, who's aging, and who knows how long that lasts, but he is getting older in a league that typically is not super welcoming to older players. So that's really interesting. His teammate, Keon, what do you think of him?
Keon is a little bit further away. I think that Keon is like this year's guard hyper athlete. I would say like he is like the similar style of athlete as Jalen Harris in terms of how they move. Keon is a better athlete than Jalen Harris, which is pretty remarkable. Keon's jumper is still far away. They were teammates at Tennessee, and Keon both doesn't shoot, and when he does shoot, there was a very low percentage, and there's going to need to be a real rebuild. another 2-foot leaper. The difference being that like while Springer is a like strength to power, so like he gets downhill using his strength and then will power up. Keon just is just downhill to get space and has to load on 2 feet, which is for an oddball player historically for skinny guys been a little bit more difficult because any bump will dislodge them. Where if you're built like Kyle Lowry, it doesn't matter if you jump off 1 foot or 2 foot, like nobody's taking a spot that you want away from you. I think that the passing is good, but not excellent. Like seeing him as a secondary playmaker, somebody who attacks a tilted defense, gets downhill. If there's a big man, like you dunk him through the basket. Like that's sort of the general profile of Keon Johnson. I think that he's a bigger swing in terms of team building because there's a lot of skills that are hinted at or could be developed in time. But right now, it's much more of a projection than what shows up on tape consistently.
Okay, so let's pretend for a second that the Raptors are very interested in a very big swing, that they, for whatever reason, are going to continue to deny Pascal Siakam lots of pick and roll possessions, and OG Anunoby isn't going to get much of them either, that they're very much stuck on just giving the guards lots of possessions and not exploring anything else in the way that they're, building their team. And so they want a big event creation guy or somebody who could grow to be that from this draft in, let's say, between number 4 and number 12. Keon Johnson sounds like a big swing, but is there anybody else in there who you might think of?
Yeah, I would say Josh Giddey would be another big swing. Australian point guard, 6'8", but with a negative wingspan. He's had a very strong last 2 months in Australia, having I think 3 triple doubles this month. He is in a lot of ways the player that people thought LaMelo was in terms of like being like a wild decision maker with struggles on defense, whose shot is sort of there, but sort of not. Melo wasn't like far more shifty off the dribble than people gave credit for. If consistently you watch the games, you saw that it was really difficult for people to stay in front of him. He just wasn't strong enough to hold those positions. Giddey's handle is very much reductive, but he is capable of operating and getting to spots and making extremely advanced reads when he gets to those spots. It's just the need to develop a handle. And the thing that I've come to associate most with the Raptors is their work with Pascal's handle, which is maligned him. It may be for his reliance on the spin move, is so much better than it was in New Mexico State. And whether that's his off-season work or the work with the team, there has been a consistent development of handles for bigger players, and I feel like this would be a pretty good marriage. Giddey's shooting numbers are he shot 43, 31, 70 for field goal, 3-point, and free throw. It's a little disjointed. There's a bit of a weird elbow out, but averaging 7 rebounds and 7 assists as an 18-year-old playing against grown men in a league that is very much tilted against skinny guys. It's really hard to get a foul call in Australia, basically. An American I know who played there called it rugby on hardwood. And he's capable of dealing with that physicality, even though he doesn't have the explosiveness or the physical strength to finish through contact. He'd be a big swing because, like, if you can add the athleticism, if you can add the handle and fix the shooting a little bit, he's probably one of the 3 best passers in a class that has a lot of really, really good passers. And not necessarily needing him to be like an 100% primary because Pascal's going to have reps, because OG's going to have reps, probably makes it easier to develop him.
Okay. That's insightful. So when we're talking about passers, is Josh Giddey a guy who can get downhill, the event creation of it all? Like the Raptors, they pass quite a bit. Like Fred VanVleet, he'll take the screen, he'll get to the nail, and he'll pop it out to the corner. He passes out of drives at a really high rate. But as far as guys who are going to take it all the way to the rim and make teams feel like they have to defend the rim because the Raptors don't bring a lot of pressure there. Keon Johnson, is he a guy like that? Jaden Springer, Josh Giddey, among those is there a fit, quote unquote, that you would like to see in Toronto?
I think it's Springer, because like Keon can get downhill the best out of the three, but he doesn't pass as well out of those. Like, he can create those events, but doesn't capitalize on them. Giddey is the best passer of the three by a huge stretch, but he, for right now, is one of the least explosive ball handlers. So he gets to a lot of his situations by being bigger, by being stronger, by understanding angles better than some guards in Australia, and he will throw people open. So he's capable of seeing where the play is going to be and throwing a daring, might be a good word, pass to a cutter who doesn't even realize that they're open yet, or hasn't even started cutting, and he'll put the weight on it. So to me, Springer is sort of the Goldilocks, where he can get downhill and he can make good reads, and being the youngest of the three, there's being sort of the safest of the three, and also possessing the skills at a youth level, makes him, to me, the best of it, and somebody that I would have on a Raptors specific board much higher than basically everybody else in the draft community.
Interesting. Well, you know that I did a podcast with Evan Zaucha talking about feel. As far as proactive and reactionary passing, how would you categorize, if you're comfortable, those three players?
So I would say Giddey would be like excellent, or whatever term you like above excellent. So much so that at times he throws passes that I don't understand what he was trying to do, because it was some 5-dimensional chess. Then I would say that Springer is good, very good, sort of on that border. The Tennessee spacing makes it difficult to figure out exactly where people are with that, because they were so rarely placed in well-spaced circumstances where the defense was put in more difficult rotations, like higher leverage situations. And then Keon, I would say, has okay to solid feel. Keon had a really late rise through the RSCI ranks, and this is his first, he played the Adidas circuit, which is not which has high level talent, but it's not as deep as the other high school circuits. So this was sort of his first consistent high level basketball on a national scale, and you can kind of see that he's still figuring out how high major Division I rotations speed is, and how length affects certain shots for him. So I think that he's still learning, and that there's room for his feel to rise. But as of right now, that's where I would have him.
Okay, let's change gears for a little bit then. Two guys who are not similar, but that are different than the aforementioned three. Kai Jones and Scotty Barnes. Pick whoever you want, but what are your thoughts?
Okay, I'll start with Kai Jones because he is probably the best mover in the class. It is unnatural for 6'11" people to move as well as him. I think that if you were to it's sort of superhuman that he's able to flip his hips and change directions and get around. Pascal is a good mover, but you also see that Pascal's a very tall human being, and at times it's laborious. He's able to get there, but it never looks suave. He's oh yeah, you got to that spot. We made this rotation. With Kai, if you were to zoom out enough, you would think he was a 5'11" person with how well he's able to move. Shot blocker. At Texas is a difficult evaluative context under Shaka Smart, because they didn't ask him to make any decisions. He was a play finisher, where he would use that athleticism to try to get up and dunk on people, or just shoot. And I think the jumper is wasn't taken that often, only 2 times per 36, but he shot it at 38%, which is really positive. So the feel on offense is hard to parse, because he just wasn't put in that many situations where he was asked to read a set defense. But there are moments where you can see the Giannis Pascal Siakam last step, where he's outside the paint on step 1 of a Euro step, and then step 2 he's standing under the rim. And that bodes well. Just if you can craft a little more dribble moves, a little more of of the softball skills onto him. You have a player who's really capable of attacking downhill with a jumper and can switch on defense, and that is an extremely valuable playoff player.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Scotty Barnes, what are your thoughts on him?
Okay, Scotty Barnes is very interesting. I think Scotty Barnes requires the most contextual fit of any player in this draft. He's my favorite player to watch because he is a defensive psychopath. Like, he just wants to compete on defense. He just wants to make rotations. He just wants to like beat teams to death with deflections and steals and just smother them. It's really wonderful. He's built like a WWE wrestler, just all thighs and arms, super long arms. I think he's like a +7 or +8, standing at 6'8". He's a forward who kind of has to be a center on offense, but you don't want him to play center on defense. So he's a weird cross match player. Good passing instincts. He played point guard at Florida State full time. He's good at making reactive passing, so he understands where the defense needs to be, but he doesn't have a handle to create that advantage himself. So you would ideally want to put him in a situation where the advantage is already created, he can seize upon it. So if you have a 5 that can invert the offense, that can stretch out, that probably would be able to initiate offense, so like a Karl Anthony Towns or something like that. Scotty makes a lot of sense. The reason why he does need so much of a structural fit is that the shooting has never turned a corner. I've been watching Scotty for about 5 years now, and he's never really put it together in terms of volume or percentage. He, as a primary ball handler, only took 2.4 three-pointers a game, making 27% of them. He just passes up a lot of shots that he could take. And he's very good. He's a good horizontal athlete and is obviously a really high motor guy, but he does not have any kind of vertical pop. If he were much shorter, he would have like, if his arms were even 2 or 3 inches shorter, I don't think he would have half as many dunks. It's mostly just like getting a couple inches off the ground and putting those forever arms into the air. It does limit his on-ball utility, just not having any kind of vertical pop, but it also limits him as a defender because he's best as a cleanup guy or as walling off before they get to the rim, but you can't use him as a primary rim protector, which again makes the fit more difficult because how many guys are there who can space an offense to pair him with in a front court that can space an offense out and create a lot of gravity for him to operate within, but also on the other end can do primary rim protection stuff. So you need a lot of understanding of how best to use him and what lineups to play him in. And I don't necessarily see that context playing out in Toronto. I think they have enough hesitant shooters to add a really hesitant one and have it make sense.
So between those two,
I would probably take Kai. Kai makes more sense because I think you could play him at the 5 more, where playing Scotty at the 5 around Pascal or OG, like at the 4 or even with both of them, would be a very hilarious defensive lineup. The teams would probably score 40 points per game if you just left them all out there, but there would be a 1970s style offense. It would be a problematic offensive fit.
Okay. Let's clean up the, let's say the top 10. So Kuminga, Moody, Mitchell, and let's put Garuba in there as well. We'll start with Kuminga. What do you think of him?
Okay, Kuminga is a theoretical player in that, like, a lot of times, like, what people are seeing is the thing that is like the version of him in the future. Because right now he's a lot of tools that isn't necessarily bound together. He's a 6'8", hyper, super athletic guy. I think that he's best as a 4 because he doesn't necessarily have the handle to play the 3 and initiate offense. I would categorize him as a low feel creator. He has never had a real physical match for his skills. Even in like the G League, it's just difficult to find 6'8" people who can close down the space he can create with like setbacks or anything like that, which it can encourage him to take really tough shots. His shooting splits in the G League, again, only 13 games, but averaging 32 minutes a game, were 38, 24, 62. not particularly encouraging. The most damning thing isn't the true shooting percentage or the 3-point rate. It's the fact that he was, basically one of the best athletes in the G League, and his free throw attempt rate was 25, which speaks to the inability of getting to spots where teams have to foul you. He's super athletic in transition or when he can have enough space, but he's not the type of athlete who can take a half step, get bumped, and finish through. I think that's mostly handle. But the handle in conjunction with the passing, basically averaged the same assist and turnover, or had a 1-to-1 assist turnover ratio, which isn't terrible. But he also was not asked to do a lot of passing, and most of the assists that he has are one more to an open shooter, rather than any real pick and roll reads. To me, he's like the guy with the most wide variety of outcomes, and I think people attach themselves to guys who have this particular athletic profile and can do some of the things that are present in his highlights. Those guys, you can look at that and see Jason Tatum, but when you watch the games, it's there's less of that than you would hope, and applying the shot making on a game to game basis and just getting easy looks for himself and for his teammates isn't really present.
And Moses Moody, who is, I guess if you go to, I can't remember where it was, I think NBADraft.net has him mocked to the Raptors currently.
Yeah, Moses Moody is like the closest thing to a pure 3-and-D player in this draft. He is, funny enough, a teammate of Scotty Barnes and Cade Cunningham in high school on what I would say is the best high school team of all time. Moses Moody is a guy who takes a lot of threes and makes a lot of threes. Another truly wild wingspan. I think it's above +8 at 6'5". 6'6" is what he's listed at now. Huge free throw rate. He is the heir to the Jamal Crawford 3-point and one. I don't think I've ever seen a prospect better at kicking their legs out to get fouled and making the shot. That's honestly where half of his free throw attempts come from. The jumper is still has some imperfections. There's been a long-term concern about his balance. He doesn't necessarily do a fantastic job handling contact. He's on the skinny side. He's a strong guy, but he's not. He doesn't have a particularly wide base. Guys like OG Pascal, who are a little thicker on the legs, can handle a wider variety of defensive assignment. I think that with Moody, you're just getting defensive rotations. You're getting closeouts. He's a little bit of a passer, not much. He had flashes of initiation, but that wasn't a thing he was particularly asked to do at Arkansas. I think that the team building idea on Moody is that he's the guy who exactly what you're going to get from him, which is shooting, the ability to play swarming defense, and just really long arms. And if he can do more than that, then you're building towards a drilled pass shoot player. But on a good team, this is the sort of player that there happen to just always be a lot of.
Davion Mitchell. I know Raptors fans, there's a sect of them that are kind of over short point guards or short guards at all, which, who's to say if there's a limit on how many of those you can have on a team. But what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, Davion Mitchell, every year we have a guy who wins himself into the draft lottery, going to Baylor, winning a national championship, taking a huge jump as a shooter in his junior year. Will do a lot of things for your draft stock. I tend to see the 3-point percentage as a bit of a fluke. He was not seen as a particularly positive shooter in either of his 2 seasons before this one and then this year. On 4.7 attempts, he made 45% of his threes. I tend to see that as an outlier because he's only a 64% free throw shooter on small attempts. I'm a believer that volume broadly is the best representation of how good of a shooter you are. And if you're shooting 47% or 45% from 3, you should be taking as many threes as possible. I think that Mitchell is probably starting to fall down to a more reasonable spot where he will be used better. I think seeing him as a primary is unreasonable to me. Not that he's a bad player. It's just that players with single year 3-point jumps backed by winning are probably going to fall a little bit more down to their level in the NBA. And I don't necessarily see the same team building idea here on the team where you also have like Fred. It's like the defense is going to be very helpful, but I don't see this as like, unless you assume that this team is simply like, just when it gets back to Toronto, is going to be, a top 3 seed in the East. And you just want to add a little more of an older player. Davion is 22, going to be 23 very soon. An older guy who can just produce in the playoffs, and is physically strong enough to handle the pressures of the playoffs. That makes sense to me in theory. I just think that this draft has a lot of fun wing upside players, and I don't think that the Raptors are in that top 3 spot just off the rip.
Okay, and Garuba, and let's do Trey Mann as well.
Okay, Garuba is very, very, very fun. We went from a guy who was boosted by winning and in Mitchell to a guy who was probably hurt by winning in Usman Garuba. He plays for Real Madrid. He's a youth prodigy, basically been on the NBA radar since he was 14. 6'8", power forward / maybe wing ? Another very stocky, ripped guy at 230. And I think 230 might be a little bit on the light side. He is a more versatile defender to me than Scotty Barnes. I think that in time he can defend wings and do everything except like the biggest of fives. A better athlete than Barnes, despite while having a somewhat similar frame. I think he's like a +6 in the wingspan department. His issue is that he played on a team that is a fringe playoff team in the NBA, and in Europe, young players are expected to do the role that suits the team best, especially in their draft year, rather than like working on them exploring the studio space and developing their talents. So Garuba was basically never asked to dribble. And I think of him as a wing long term because he has a lot of really interesting flashes of passing and understanding. But he's basically been a power forward his whole life, playing for a professional team since he was 17 years old. 3-point rate is 38%, but he also just like doesn't shoot anything other than threes or layups because his role is to either attack or close out or swing the ball. I think Garuba is fun. I think that he would be fun in the defensive sense in the same way that Scotty would. But this is another player who needs reps. And if you're going to take him, I would want him to be put in like the 905 for a little bit to sort of figure out what he can do with bigger reps and a bigger creation burden just to see what could be shook out. The jumper needs some work, though he's come alive a little bit in the last month of the Real Madrid season. Interesting guy. I don't know if the Raptors are the best developmental context for him because they have a glut of interesting combo forwards who can slide between multiple positions, and I would simply just want Usman to play in a little freer search situation early. But definitely a guy that I really like in this draft. And then Trey Mann is Trey Mann is a creator type. Probably the nicest handle in this draft. I would say one of the nicest handles. I think there are two. Now that I think about it, two that I might take over him. He has the reputation for being a shooter, but this season was just his best season as a shooter. I think that reputation might be a little bit more about the type of shots he takes rather than the type of shots he makes. His shooting splits for the season were 46, 40, 83. The concern with Trey Mann is the feel level. I think that there is a want to see a player who, has shown extreme shooting versatility, loves to take off the dribble threes, can take shots off movement, very deep range. And then you pair that with his handle and you think, okay, this is, a guy who can have primary duties. And I think that he struggles to read directions of defenses. I think that he can struggle to make the appropriate move at the appropriate time. It's sort of the curse of having a really nice handle is you tend to want to overuse it. And there are times where a dribble to the left is open and he'll, go in and out right, snatch back, and then eventually go to the left, but it doesn't feel like there's a good process there. This would be more of a combo guard style usage for him early because of the passing concerns and the read and floor concerns. which I think can work with the Kyle Lowry that exists now, but in a world where Kyle Lowry no longer plays for the Raptors, I'm not certain how that context going forward past the rookie year, past the second year would work for Trey Mann. To me, a Raptors player or a player I would like the Raptors to draft is one that can play a smaller role with Kyle on the floor, and then also be sort of training for Kyle's role and Kyle's usage for a world when Kyle leaves.
Okay. So we'll discuss like trading down, and especially since you like Jaden Springer, and, especially with, where he's mocked, there's like between, what would you say, like 5 and 17, 18, there's a lot of movement just on how people are placing guys, but there is a reasonable percentage that the Raptors get the 4th pick, let's say. So let's do Jalen Green, Jalen Suggs. Who do you like better in the context of the Raptors, and why?
I would probably take Jalen Green because Jalen Green fits, like Suggs has a more overall balanced game, I would say. He can pass, he can shoot. You can throw him on a wide variety of defenders, but he also has a handle concern and doesn't necessarily put like outrageous pressure on the rim. He puts solid pressure on the rim, but he is not going to cause a defense to be in rotation just because he has the ball in his hands. Jalen Green does exactly that. I think Jalen Green is a better shooter long term. I think that his role is more straightforward in how he would be used in this team. There are concerns about his free throw rate. It was only 17% in the G League. He's on the skinnier side. That's obviously something that has to be built up in time. But he took a huge variety of shots, a lot of off the dribble threes, and shot 36% from an NBA line, which is impressive. 82% from the free throw line when he did get to the line, which is very good. And he has one of the best first steps in this draft. Just the opportunity to swing it to him on the weak side, and he's going to have 2 feet in the paint. On this Raptors team, which does have a need for that seems like a hand-in-glove fit for the current build of this team. So if you're thinking, okay, can we add a player that will be able to contribute as we tinker this team toward the playoffs, now that we're out of the fake season, now that we're out of Tampa, like Jalen Green, if that is your conception of this team, Jalen Green to me is the perfect fit for that circumstance. And
when we're talking about Jalen Green, is there an expectation? What do you view his ceiling as? Because his ceiling is obviously a big part of drafting guys.
I mean, I think that you can get him into like a primary who takes threes off the dribble, who is capable of shifting a defense, and like I think that because of the other like stars and creators that are on this team, you can build some of the passing reads out. He's a solid passer, maybe like a notch below Trey Mann, but if you're using him as a secondary, or as like his main job is to get 2 feet in the paint, the passing reads get a lot easier. So I think that like seeing him as a primary with maybe a slightly lesser passing burden, but more expectation of shooting off the bounce, that seems like a good ceiling outcome for this roster's build.
Okay, and let's say Jalen Green goes 3. Would you be happy if you're the Raptors if you get Suggs at 4?
Yeah, I mean, Suggs is not a bad player. Suggs is a good return for this team. You're going to have to adjust roles accordingly. I think that there's going to be probably a bigger burden for OG handling the ball in that circumstance. I think that Suggs would raise the floor of this team just because he does so much well at 6'4", and you can use him between the 1 and the 2. You can probably have him handle the ball more in Fred lineups so that Fred can do off-ball stuff. And then, but the downhill concerns are still there. He still has the struggle with the handle. He still has some movement skill problems that he's very upper body, like heavy in the way that he moves. And it can cause problems for him when he has to use like stop-start athleticism, when he has to wiggle his way out of small ball handling situations. Hopefully the floor is spaced enough that he doesn't have to get into too many of those. But there are I don't think that it's just a perfect fit. I think it's a very good selection, but it's going to require some roster building to put him in a from where the roster is now. Not that that's impossible, just that like from this current roster situation, before free agency, before the season ends, before the draft, I have some small concerns about it.
Okay. And so obviously, if anybody's been paying attention to this conversation, it seems like Jaden Springer is somebody you like a lot. But it also seems that as far as guys fitting in and talent level, that nobody is interchangeable, but if you zoom out, there's an interchangeability between quite a few of these guys and what you might expect and ceiling. Context obviously is very important. But the Raptors, let's say they're at 7 or 8. Is that somewhere where you think you could get risky and try and trade back and still get a guy like Jaden Springer? Are you confident in their ability to draft, let's say a top 8 pick in the between 12 to 16? Is that something that they should look at, or do you just grab the guy you really like when you have your pick?
I generally believe in grabbing the guy that you have at your pick.
Okay.
Because I think that while there is an impulse to want to trade down, there could be somebody who just wants just as badly to trade up. And I think that if it's we drafted, the player we wanted 8th versus we drafted him 10th and got a second round pick in 2026 or whatever, history doesn't really smile upon the latter. Just did you get your guy is the most important thing. And if you're right, we generally tend to forget the other stuff. I also think that teams should swing more in drafts. So if you believe that, this team needs somebody who gets downhill, the best player getting downhill in this draft is Sharif Cooper. If you're at 8 and, Sharif Cooper is going to go 16, just take him 8. The only time I would say that if, you're deciding between a first and second round grade on somebody, then the contracts come into play. But I generally just prefer teams take their guy unless they know for a fact that they're going to slip because of the team needs and general trade atmosphere. To me, the risk isn't broadly worth it. But if, you have a guarantee that the player isn't going to be picked, in a Markelle Fultz, Jason Tatum draft day type switch, that makes sense. But if you trade down too much, you open yourself up to the risk that the player that you like and think is one of the best players in the draft, that somebody else may have the same inkling and can move the opposite way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I feel like that's good enough for the first round. You brought up the second round, which we'll be discussing next Friday. For you, listener, you'll be listening to it next Saturday and listening to this Saturday. So, PD, thank you so much for taking the time, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
And before we get out of here, plug away, sir. Where should the people be reading you and all that?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at AboveTheBreak3. There is a link to my Patreon where all of my draft breakdowns are free. If you have a couple bucks, throw them if possible. It's greatly appreciated. If not, read to your heart's content. I've started working through the 2021 Wings, which is where I spend most of my time. And this year I've added a film component where I, once I finish a breakdown, get an analyst, a journalist, a person in the basketball Twitter sphere, and talk through a game on YouTube. We do it live on Twitch and then upload it to YouTube later. So we've done Rocco Percussion, Usman Garuba, who we talked about, Josh Giddey, who we talked about. Those are up on YouTube. And if you'd like to follow me on Twitch, it's twitch.tv on PD_web, or just type in Let's Watch Film and then the name of the player on YouTube. I feel like they're good productions and we work real hard on them.
Okay. And listener, cannot co-sign it enough. All that stuff will be linked on Raptors Republic. And probably if you're getting this through Twitter, it'll be on my Twitter under this tweet and all that stuff. So PD, one last time, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Okay. And listener, thanks for tuning in. But whether you got into it in the morning or at night, have a blessed day. See you next week and goodbye.
Summer's near, which means great deals at Lowe's.
Ah, the sounds of summer. Sizzling barbecues, whirring lawnmowers, and the unbridled joy of outdoor living.
Well, you'll like the sound of this. The Summer Takeover event is on at Lowe's. Save big until Wednesday on items like Scott's Garden Soil for $5.49 and Scott's Naturescape Cedar Mulch for $4.49. With savings like these, summer's arrival is loud and clear.
I hear ya.
Shop online at Lowe's.ca. Conditions apply. Lowe's, home to any possibility. 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 Home to any possibility.